At 6:20 a.m. February 1st, near Pokrovsk, eastern Ukraine, visibility dropped below 30 meters. A dense winter fog rolled across open fields and frozen roads. Russian assault groups moved fast. Nearly 90 troops, more than 20 vehicles, ATVs, motorcycles, civilian cars, no heavy armor, no air cover. The plan was simple: use fog as a shield, slip past drones, reach Pokrovsk before sunrise. It looked calculated. It looked desperate. And it looked final. According to reports from Kiev Post and Ukrainian National Guard units, multiple Russian platoons advanced simultaneously toward Pokrovsk and the nearby settlements of Rashina. This was not a probing action. This was a full assault wave launched on the same morning across exposed terrain under extreme weather conditions. Russian command believed the fog would blind Ukrainian reconnaissance. They believed technology would fail. They believed speed would compensate for vulnerability. They were wrong. Ukrainian drone operators were already airborne. FPV units cut through the fog using thermal feeds and pre-registered kill zones. Within minutes, the first vehicles were hit. Fires erupted against the white snow. Columns stalled. Riders scattered. The fog turned from cover into a trap. By nightfall, Ukrainian units reported that nearly 4 Russian platoons had been neutralized in a single day. Around 80 assault troops were removed from the battlefield. More than a dozen vehicles were destroyed or abandoned. 2 soldiers were captured alive. The rest never reached Pokrovsk. Telegram footage released later showed drones flying through gray nothingness, locking onto targets that could not see them coming. What was meant to be concealment became isolation. And then the unthinkable happened. The fog did not save the attackers, it erased them. This was not an isolated clash. This was a signal, a warning, and a preview of something much larger unfolding around Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is not just another name on a battlefield map. It is one of the last major defensive anchors in western Donetsk. If it falls, supply routes north and west fracture. Ukrainian logistics thin out. Russian forces gain a staging ground toward the so-called fortress belt of cities that shield the rest of the region. That is why Moscow keeps pushing here. Since late 2024, Russian command has treated Pokrovsk as a political objective, not just a military one. Capturing the city would support the Kremlin's claim that Donetsk is almost secured. It would also help meet an internal deadline reportedly set for spring 2026, aimed at presenting territorial control before any renewed diplomatic pressure. Reuters and the BBC have repeatedly noted how Russian operations in Donetsk intensified whenever political timelines approached. Ukraine understands this. So does NATO. Pokrovsk sits near key rail lines and road junctions feeding Mirnograd, Reshina, and settlements further north. Meduza and Defense News have described Reshina as a logistics hinge. Control it, and Ukrainian resupply into northern Pokrovsk becomes slower and riskier. Lose it, and Russian assault corridors widen. The contrast between the two sides here is stark. Ukraine defends with layered reconnaissance, decentralized drone teams, and small, mobile infantry groups. Russia attacks with mass, speed, and improvisation. Cheap vehicles against precision-guided explosives. Civilian cars against military-grade sensors. Quantity versus detection. Winter magnifies this imbalance. Fog, snow, and low light once favored Russian doctrine, reducing aerial surveillance and forcing close combat. In November, Forbes reported that fog allowed hundreds of Russian soldiers to infiltrate parts of Pokrovsk temporarily. Ukrainian officials admitted visibility gaps, but those windows closed fast. By early 2025, Ukrainian units adapted. Thermal imaging, pre-mapped drone corridors, autonomous strike patterns. Even when optical feeds degrade, targeting continues. This sets the stage for February's events. Russian command attempted to replay earlier weather-based successes. They sent assault groups across open ground between Pokrovsk and Reshina, terrain with minimal cover and long exposure times. Critical threats in BBC reporting show that these approaches had already caused heavy Russian losses through January. Yet the pressure did not ease. Ukrainian General Staff data indicates more than 80 separate Russian assault attempts in the Pokrovsk direction since the start of the year. Most failed before reaching Ukrainian lines. What happened in the fog was not an accident. It was the collision of outdated assumptions with a battlefield that has already moved on. And the consequences were immediate. The first movement began before sunrise. Russian assault elements left their assembly areas in staggered groups, not columns. ATVs surged forward in pairs. Motorcycles followed tree lines. Civilian cars filled the gaps. The fog reduced visibility to shapes and shadows. From ground level, it felt safe enough. From the air, it was a different story. Ukrainian drone teams have anticipated this exact move. Thermal sensors cut through moisture. Preloaded coordinates turn the battlefield into a grid. Once the first vehicle crossed a trigger line, the response unfolded in layers. The opening strike hit an ATV cluster less than 3 kilometers from Pokrovsk. Seconds later, a second drone dove into a civilian sedan moving too fast to stop. Fire flashed through the fog. The road clogged instantly. Riders abandoned vehicles and ran into open fields, believing the fog still protected them. That belief lasted minutes. FPV drones adjusted altitude and speed, flying low to stay beneath the cloud layer. Others climbed, releasing explosives from above. Ukrainian footage later showed operators guiding drones by heat signatures alone, striking targets barely visible even on screen. This was the first mini-climax. The second came near Rashina. At roughly the same time, a mechanized Russian element attempted to accelerate the assault there. 3 armored vehicles pushed forward, supported by infantry. The plan changed mid-operation. Russian command abandoned infiltration and ordered speed. According to Ukrainian airborne units, the goal was to overwhelm defenses before drones could react. They reacted anyway. Ukrainian brigades coordinated across sectors. Recon drones marked approach routes. FPVs followed. 2 armored vehicles were disabled on the outskirts. Infantry scattered. More than 10 Russian troops were removed from the fight in minutes. The remaining attackers retreated, leaving equipment behind. Then came the twist no one expected. The fog thickened further. Instead of helping Russian forces escape, it trapped them between strike zones. Units lost orientation. Some moved in circles. Others ran directly into pre-sighted artillery fire. Ukrainian operators described targets reappearing on thermal feeds after disappearing moments earlier, exhausted and exposed. A third escalation followed near Pokrovsk itself. Russian troops, now fragmented, tried to regroup using motorcycles for rapid repositioning. Ukrainian drones pursued at low altitude, weaving between trees. In one recorded sequence, a single drone tracked multiple riders sequentially, forcing them to split apart, then striking each path one by one. By afternoon, Ukrainian National Guard units moved forward to secure the area. 2 Russian soldiers were taken into custody. Equipment losses mounted. Around 10 ATVs, 4 motorcycles, and 6 civilian cars confirmed destroyed or abandoned. The final twist was psychological. Russian command channels reportedly went silent for hours. No coordination, no extraction. Assault units had been committed under the assumption of concealment. That assumption collapsed. By nightfall, the battlefield was quiet again. The fog lifted slowly. What it revealed was not progress, but absence. Another assault wave had vanished before reaching its objective. And this was only one day. The events near Pokrovsk on February 1st carried consequences far beyond one failed assault. Militarily, economically, and psychologically, the balance tilted further against Moscow in this sector. Start with manpower. Ukrainian National Guard and airborne units reported that roughly 90 Russian assault troops were rendered combat ineffective in a single day across Pokrovsk and Rashina. That number matters. According to Reuters and the BBC, Russian assault tactics in Donetsk rely on repeated platoon-sized pushes, often recycled from depleted formations. Losing nearly 4 platoons in 24 hours forces Russian command to pull replacements from already stretched reserves. Equipment losses compound the issue. At least 20 vehicles were lost or abandoned. These were not tanks, but that is the point. Russia is using ATVs, motorcycles, and civilian cars because armored vehicle stocks are under pressure. Defense News and Janes reported in late 2024 that Russian armored losses had outpaced refurbishment capacity, pushing units to improvise mobility. Cheap vehicles save money up front, but they magnify losses when facing drones. Each destroyed ATV removes both transport and trained personnel at once. The economic angle is brutal. Every assault drains resources with no territorial gain. Reuters estimates Russia's monthly military expenditure remains above $10 billion, even as growth slows under sanctions. Replacing vehicles, drones, fuel, and logistics for failed operations like Pokrovsk creates negative return on investment. Ukraine spends far less to defend, often using FPV drones costing a few $100s to neutralize assets worth tens of thousands. Social impact follows quickly. Russian military bloggers, tracked by BBC monitoring, increasingly describe Pokrovsk as a black hole for assault units. This perception matters. Morale affects recruitment, discipline, and willingness to advance. Ukrainian commanders exploit this by allowing failed assaults to unfold fully, reinforcing the sense that certain approaches are unwinnable. Militarily, Pokrovsk remains a choke point. As of early February 2025, Ukraine still controls the northern part of the city and maintains fire control over approach routes. BBC interviews with Ukrainian commanders confirm that Russian forces have not pushed combat lines into central Pokrovsk, despite months of claims to the contrary. This undermines Moscow's information strategy, which relies on announcing gains ahead of diplomatic moments. Strategically, the pattern is clear. Russia is burning through personnel and equipment to maintain pressure, not to achieve breakthroughs. Ukraine absorbs the pressure, trading space for attrition where necessary, and holding critical nodes where it counts. Janes and Defense News both note that this favors the defender in the medium term. Assault intensity drops as units exhaust. Commanders hesitate. Reserves thin. Pokrovsk is doing exactly what Ukraine needs it to do, and the longer it holds, the heavier the cost becomes for the attacker. What happened in the fog near Pokrovsk does not stay in Pokrovsk. It echoes across NATO briefings, EU defense meetings, and military think tanks from Washington to Tokyo. Western analysts are watching closely. Reuters and Defense News frame Pokrovsk as a case study in modern attritional warfare. Cheap, networked drones versus massed assaults. Sensors versus numbers. Software versus steel. The lesson is uncomfortable for many armies. Air superiority no longer guarantees safety at low altitude, and visibility is no longer required to strike. For NATO, this matters immediately. Alliance planners have spent decades investing in high-cost platforms. Jets priced above $80 million. Main battle tanks exceeding $10 million per unit. Pokrovsk shows how assets costing a few $100s can neutralize forces worth millions, especially when doctrine fails to adapt. Janes notes that several NATO members are now accelerating low-cost drone programs, citing Ukraine's battlefield data. The United States is part of that shift. Pentagon assessments referenced by CNN and Defense News indicate that U.S. training doctrine is incorporating lessons from Donetsk. Decentralized control, rapid kill chains, autonomous targeting loops. The fog assault failure reinforces the idea that terrain and weather no longer provide reliable cover against a network defender. Europe feels the pressure too. EU defense ministers, according to DW, are reassessing stockpiles and production timelines. Ukraine's ability to hold Pokrovsk with limited resources highlights how critical sustained supply lines are. Artillery shells, drones, electronic warfare gear. Every delayed shipment becomes strategic. China is watching quietly. Beijing's military analysts have studied Ukraine since 2022, but Pokrovsk adds a new dimension: urban-adjacent attrition, drone dominance in poor weather, high losses without breakthroughs. For any future contingency involving Taiwan or border regions, these lessons cut deep. Cheap systems scale faster than prestige platforms. The Middle East sees parallels as well. Conflicts in Gaza, Yemen, and the Red Sea already show asymmetric tools challenging conventional power. Pokrovsk reinforces the trend. Small units, precision strikes, psychological erosion over time. It is not about one decisive battle. It is about sustained pressure until command structures crack. Looking ahead 3 to 6 months, several scenarios emerge. If Russian assaults continue at this pace, analysts cited by Reuters expect operational exhaustion in parts of Donetsk by late spring. Not collapse, but slowdown. Fewer coordinated pushes, more reliance on ad hoc units. Ukraine, meanwhile, aims to hold rather than advance, buying time for resupply and training. Another scenario involves escalation. Moscow could redeploy fresher units, including naval infantry or newly mobilized formations, to reset momentum. BBC reporting suggests this remains possible but costly, politically and economically. Each redeployment weakens another sector. The fog assault near Pokrovsk fits into all of this. It is a local failure with global implications. A demonstration that warfare has crossed another threshold. And many capitals are taking notes. The fog near Pokrovsk was supposed to change the equation. Instead, it confirmed it. On February 1st, nearly 90 Russian assault troops moved under cover of weather, speed, and improvisation. They carried a familiar assumption that poor visibility would level the battlefield. That assumption collapsed in hours. Ukrainian defenses held, drone networks adapted, assault waves dissolved before reaching their targets. This was not luck, it was structure. Pokrovsk remains standing because Ukraine has turned defense into a system. Sensors layered over terrain, kill zones mapped in advance, units linked digitally rather than massed physically. Every failed assault reinforces the same message to Russian command. Pressure alone is not strategy. The cost keeps rising. Manpower drains faster than it can be replaced. Vehicles disappear without territorial gain. Political deadlines slip. Claims of progress ring hollow when frontline realities contradict them. Reuters and the BBC continue to report a widening gap between Moscow's statements and battlefield outcomes in Donetsk. Strategically, Pokrovsk has become more than a city. It is a filter. Assaults enter, few emerge intact. Each failure weakens the next attempt. Each delay buys Ukraine time. Time for training, time for resupply, time for allies to adjust production and doctrine. Globally, the signal is unmistakable. Modern warfare no longer rewards mass without adaptation. Weather no longer guarantees concealment. Cheap, intelligent systems now challenge expensive platforms at scale. NATO, the United States, the EU, and even China are absorbing these lessons in real time. Yet the future is not fixed. Will Russian commands continue pushing waves into Pokrovsk, hoping numbers will eventually overwhelm defenses? Will Ukraine be able to sustain this tempo through spring and summer without overextension? And if exhaustion sets in on one side first, does the front stabilize or shift suddenly? These questions remain open. What is clear is this: the fog did not save the assault. It exposed its weakness, and Pokrovsk, once again, proved why it matters. If this analysis added clarity, share your thoughts in the comments. Debate the scenarios, challenge the assumptions, and subscribe for continued in-depth coverage of the battles shaping the war's